Hello everyone, and welcome to our class again today. And this particular lesson is going to focus on market research. And I know a lot of times when people think of marketing, they think of the creative side of things. But there's also a very big statistical number crunching side of marketing as well. And there are entire courses and graduate level courses devoted to how to conduct marketing research and do it right. Today, really what I want to do is give you an overview of the important key concepts of marketing research, and I'll give you a few stories as to how this kind of plays out in the real world and what the errors usually are that are made by those conducting market research. So to start off, there are two different kinds of market research. You're looking for information because you're thinking of launching a new product. You want to know if it's going to meet people's needs. You're going to want to know what do people really want in that product, what's the proper pricing, what attracts them, what buzzwords or phrases make them say, I'd like to look at that. The two different categories of research are secondary and primary. Now, as a student, you've probably done a lot of research. You've been asked to do research for a paper. I'm willing to bet that almost all of the research you have ever done is called secondary research. In other words, you are looking for information that other people have already obtained and put together, and then you're going to use it in whatever paper you're writing. So for instance, when you find out that 3,000 people live in a town because you looked at the census records, that's secondary research. Someone else did that research and collected it, and you're just using it. If you find out that 25% of the residents of a particular region speak Spanish as their first or native language, secondary research. And secondary research is a good way to, for most people, to collect some data about the markets that they're looking at. However, the problem, even though it's easy and it's convenient, the problems are that research was collected by someone else, number one, and you do not know the quality of the collection of that data. And two, it was collected for some purpose other than what you're using it for. And that actually makes a big difference, because how researchers ask questions, how surveys are made, is really very, very much geared towards what is their final use of that data. They may be asking questions in such a way that they don't need to distinguish between answers that are slightly different, whereas that slight difference in respondents' answers to their questions could be critical for you, because it's that difference that you're counting on for your particular product. So secondary data is easy, it's available, that's what you grab when you need to research something, but it was not made for you or for your product. And so that's where we now move into primary research, primary data gathering. And that's when you are trying to collect data or information about the general public, but it's specifically for you to be able to use for your company or product. Now, when it comes to primary data, there's a number of different ways to obtain this. And again, we're going to divide this into two different possibilities. The first is exploratory data gathering, and the second is conclusive data gathering. In the exploratory, and if you're in a marketing firm or a large firm, you're going to have to engage in the exploratory step first. You're basically saying to yourself, we've got all the existing secondary data. Now we need primary. But do we really know what we're really looking for? We need to get a sense of the markets out there. And the number one way to conduct exploratory research is to conduct what's called a focus group. Now, a focus group means bring together a group, maybe 6, 8, 12 people, and have them discuss an idea or a problem that they have, in a way that's not leading. That doesn't lead them to give the answers that you want. And you may decide to choose a single focus group, such as all college students, because you're interested in marketing to college students and you only want to hear their responses to whatever discussion you're having. Or you may want to have a very large random sample of the population that includes people from different walks of life to see if these people respond differently to the proposal you've put before them. And it may be as simple as, hey, here's this knick-knack I've invented. What do you think about this? Is it useful to you? Is it not? And once you've conducted the focus group, what you need to remember is that the people within the focus group may listen to other people in the group and change some of their answers a little bit because they're easily persuaded. So you don't want to have just one focus group. You'd like to have a series of focus groups throughout the market region and see if you come up with, see if you can observe some commonalities between the responses. If you find that a working class Hispanic male has a very strong opinion one way or another on the particular subject you're talking about, well, it could be that he's representative of Hispanic working class males in general. Or it could be he is a total outlier, which means you're not going to get the information you need from just one focus group. You're going to need to do this multiple times, and you may decide to have a focus group based solely of working class Hispanic men to get further data. This is it's a very good way to collect primary data to get a feel for what people think about your product or your idea, but it's also very time consuming and it's expensive. It's going to take a while, but to do it right, you start with your focus groups to get your exploratory data. Another thing you could do is to observe people's actions in a store. That is also a way to get exploratory data. What are they doing and how are they doing it? So that's exploratory primary data. Then you have conclusive primary data. The conclusive primary data comes after you've conducted your focus groups and you've decided, we think we know where we want to go with this. Now let's get some hard numbers, not just this touchy-feely, let's listen to people in groups and hear what they have to say. Now let's do some massive surveying and see if our findings confirm the feelings we got out of those focus groups. The most common way of doing this is through a survey, of course. And surveys and you may have answered one. They can be done online. They can be done in the mail. They can be done over the phone. They can be done in person. And of all of those, it's the in-person interviews that actually yield the best data. A lot of times on the telephone, the person you're talking to just wants to get you off the phone. And very often the person asking the questions is getting paid for how many surveys they complete, and they just want to race through. And if you give an answer that's not on their list of desired answers, they don't know what to do with it. You need to be impartial. You need to try and eliminate as much of your own bias as possible when you ask these questions. And the wording is absolutely crucial. And actually, this is where most marketing firms fall down. It is one of the hardest things to do. It's much harder than you might even think. So let me give you a few examples just from my own personal life working in market research as to where things begin to fall apart. I used to work on Martha's Vineyard for the regional government of the island. And every year, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts would give us a large grant. And for this grant, we were supposed to do surveys of people in the downtown areas and around the island about bus service. But we were very limited in the kinds of questions we were allowed to ask. But we did what was requested of us by this grant. And so one of the questions, and imagine this is Martha's Vineyard, It's summer. There's 100,000 people on an island that normally has 10,000 residents on it. People who have their cars there really don't know where they're going. And one of the first questions is, would you support more bus service on the island, or expanded bus service from Edgartown to Vineyard Haven? In the marketing business, this is what we call a "do you like ice cream" question. Of course everyone's going to say yes. And they did. Year after year we had this grant, and year after year 98% of the responses was, "Oh yes, I'm in favor of expanded bus service." And then based on those surveys, the state initiated new bus routes on the island and increased service. And guess how many additional riders we had on those buses? None! Because the question was it was an ice cream question. Instead of asking about people's travel habits, instead of asking how many times have you ridden a bus any time in your life, they were asking a question that was a very easy, "oh yes," question. Those kind of questions don't give you any usable data. They don't tell you that I live here and I want to go here and I would absolutely use a bus, and here's the proof that I would use a bus because I did it when I lived over here. You have none of that data. You've just got this silly open-ended question, do you want more bus service? You need to have a lot more detail than that. A second example I can give you actually just came from this last election, where a pollster for a Democratic Party in my state was asking Democrats about what were the most important issues to them in the upcoming election, with the idea that they'd be using this data to push a specific platform. And they listed a number of issues: the environment, criminal justice reform, racial justice, gun control, zoning issues. The mistake they made was they said, which is most important to you? But they didn't ask any of those people which side of that issue they fell on. And so you've got some people who are saying, yes, gun control is the most important issue to me and my vote. And the assumption on the pollster's part was that that meant they were in favor of more gun control and it was the most important thing in the world to them. When in fact, a number of people responded that that was their most important issue because they were 100% against it. And if you look at the presidential polling from 2020 in states across the country, and the same thing in 2016, pollsters were consistently off by much larger margins than had ever been before. Off by 5%, 7%, 8%. And they're all scrambling trying to figure out what went wrong. But in general, what went wrong was a combination of the way a question is asked and the sample of people they're asking that question of. And you've got to make sure you really nail that down. It cannot be casually done. A third example I can give you, and this shows you how excruciating you must be in designing your survey for primary data. I worked from 2019 to 2020 with the United States Census Bureau. I was not a census taker. My job was to go to town boards and community organizations in order to kind of build excitement and enthusiasm for people to respond to the census, and to try and find ways that these organizations could help us to encourage people in the towns to respond to the census. And I got to one town, and I was meeting with the Board of Selectmen at the town, and I immediately ran into an issue because one of the selectmen was very upset that there's a gender question on the U.S. Census, and the options were male and female. And he said, well, what about transgender? Why can't they just put transgender down there? And here's why you can't just throw an answer in. The census has actually done some preliminary research in this area. And if you ask the question on gender, male, female, transgender, people answer it differently than if you give them the choices of male, female, non-binary. And they give you still different answers when you ask male, male to female transgender, female, female to male transgender, non-binary. The problem is people respond very differently depending on the choices before them. So you can't sit in an office somewhere in DC or Manhattan and just decide, well, let's just pick this term because it makes sense to me sitting here. You actually have to go back to the focus groups and figure out how are people answering these questions and why are they answering it differently depending on whether I say transgender or non-binary. And how many people are you running into who may be transgender, let's say male to female, and now consider themselves female, who actually might get upset by seeing a transgender designation because, darn it, they're female, and that's who they are. We actually ran into the same problem for years with the Hispanic population. When you want to know how many people in an area have a Hispanic background, do you ask Hispanic? Do you ask Latino? Do you say Latino or Latina? Do you use Latinx, which has become, it's a very common modern contemporary thing to say, Latinx. However, most surveys done show 97% of people of Hispanic backgrounds actually reject that term. So there are some people who like it, but just because you think you like it and it's cutting edge, doesn't mean that that's the word that's going to get you the response you're looking for your particular survey. Still other surveys have said, have your origins in a nation in Latin America. And every way you ask the question, the response is different. So, rather than just pick a word to use, what you need to do is find out why do people answer this differently depending on the word I use. Go back to focus groups. And then decide what's the best way to collect the data for the purposes for which you are going to use it so that you have the soundest data available. So, those are surveys. Another way to do conclusive primary data is to sit and observe. It's expensive, it takes a long time, you've got to do it in more than one place, but you can get some very good data out of this. How many of you have heard the statement, you can't judge a book by its cover, right? Your mom or dad probably told you that. Wrong. By doing observations in bookstores, and of course this was at a time when the majority of books were being purchased in bookstores, people observing those picking books off of shelves and putting them back recorded that they spent between 3 and 5 seconds looking at a book before deciding to put it back on the shelf. And what that tells marketing people is the book cover, those few things you're looking at, is absolutely a key part of your marketing program. Because people are going to look at, here's an example, Scottish Myths and Legends by Daniel Allison. They're going to see a book, the color's going to pop, they're going to pick it up, they're going to notice it's soft cover, and the majority of books purchased today are soft cover. They're going to look at the back, oh, there's the author, his credentials, there's some newspaper reviews as to how wonderful the book is, and they put it in their shopping cart and go buy it, or they put it back on the shelf. As opposed to, same book, same subject, Anthology of Scottish Folk Tales. Hardcover, kind of thin. It's got a nice silver sheen on it, but it, at least for me, it doesn't particularly draw me in. The back doesn't have anything about the author. It's just this little blurb of white on blue. And this book is twice the price. It's not it's not an accident that more people looking at a shelf are going to grab this one than this one. Now that's, of course, bookstore purchases. We know today that About 45% of all book sales are now online, and they're through Amazon. And that tells someone marketing a book that their cover still needs to be, their front cover still needs to be flashy, needs to be designed well, but the number of 5 stars, the number of stars that reviewers give it, and the one bit of blurb that you get to put in as text are going to be crucial in getting people to purchase your particular book. In my own small farm right here, we have incorporated some of the same concepts into our own packaging. There's a commercial egg carton. It's boring. It's a carton for eggs. People are probably not going to look at this between 2 and 3 seconds before grabbing it or passing it by. But if you've got nice, shiny, colorful labels that tell you that it's 1 dozen local, organic, free-range mixed sizes, that jumps out to you. And we sell these in a local market, and we know that people who don't know us, who are not familiar with our farm, go into that store and ask for this specific brand because it popped out, they bought it, they were satisfied with it, and now they're looking for the same thing again. So, once you've gotten all your data, and it takes a long time, but it's a crucial step, you then usually put it in a database, which is, most of you are probably familiar with a database, but it's a computer program, it's a software program where you can ask very specific questions. How many of our surveys, how many people under the age of 29 said they went to the movies with their child during this week? And it takes all the survey data and spits out and says, oh, look at that, 35% of them did that. When you have customers when you have people who are specifically your customers, you now have convinced them to purchase. You usually put that in a very specific type of database called a CRM. And marketers use this term all the time. But use the CRM. Go to CRM. What's CRM? Customer Relationship Management. It's a specific database that keeps a record of everything you could imagine about your customers. What do they buy? How do they pay for it? How often do they buy it? When are they most likely to make a purchase? So that if you want to put out some type of promotion, it's just before their next probable purchase point. So these are all, these terms that we throw around, primary and secondary, conclusive, exploratory, focus group, marketers throw them around a lot, but they're important concepts, and as long as you have a basic understanding as to what we're talking about in each one, you can begin to work in that field and understand where you're going with that information. Tom Simmons signing off. Thank you.